Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something really interesting: pop culture, politics, and specifically Superman Returns. You've definitely seen superhero movies everywhere for years now, but have you ever stopped to think how much they might actually, reflect the political mood, especially around the post 9/11 period? We've got some fantastic sources guiding us, academic pieces like 9/11 Discourse and Superman Returns and Batman Begins and Superheroes and the Bush Doctrine, really deep stuff. Our goal here is to pull out the key insights, show you how Superman Returns, which came out in 2006, acts as this kind of powerful mirror to American politics and, well, anxieties after 9/11.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because these films, they don't just entertain, do they? They often echo, sometimes even reinforce the sort of cultural feelings and big ideas floating around at the time. We're going to explore how Superman Returns, whether they meant it or not, kind of became a symbol of the Bush administration's whole approach to heroism, disaster, national identity. Really makes you ask, how do these stories we watch actually shape how we understand big historical moments?
That's a perfect question to start with. Because our sources, they jump right in. They connect this huge superhero comeback in the 2000s directly to the George W. Bush presidency. It wasn't just random that Batman, Superman, Spider-Man became so massive then. The argument is these characters are like deeply woven into American politics and ideology.
Yeah, and if you look at the bigger picture, it connects to how American entertainment, essentially these huge Hollywood franchises, became even more dominant globally. Superheroes were instantly recognizable, right? Great for business. But their rise during the Bush years, you have to consider the ideological side, the genre's link to American culture. I mean, think about that crazy Der Spiegel cover in 2002. It showed President Bush and his cabinet as superheroes, like Batman and Rambo, the headline. The Bush Warriors, America's Crusade Against Evil.
Wow.
And apparently the U.S. ambassador said Bush was flattered and even ordered big posters of it. That really shows how blurred the lines got between politics and pop culture imagery.
So what's the takeaway? It suggests this, maybe deliberate, maybe unconscious, mixing of political messages and just, popular movies. Our sources talk about 9/11 discourse, basically.
Sure.
How everyone talked about and processed the attacks, really shaping these superhero stories. It's like they were reframing the fear, the anxiety of 9/11 and the war on terror, turning it into tales of heroes swooping in, last-minute rescues.
Turning trauma into, well, spectacular entertainment commodities.
Okay, so let's zero in now on Superman Returns. This is where it gets really specific and quite insightful. The sources point out, this film brought back the original superhero, the big one, explicitly tied to truth, justice, and the American way. The movie's angle was unique. It directly tapped into Superman's connections to these sort of classic American values.
Right, and what's really striking is how the film tried to make Superman relevant again. It did this by loading his story, his imagery, with the most potent elements of 9/11 as a discursive formation. That's the term they use. It literally restages parts of the 9/11 attacks as these big, spectacular movie moments. You see these recent traumatic historical events get transformed into this fantasy of, the source calls them victimless last-minute rescues free of history or context.
Wow, victimless rescues.
Yeah. It cleverly bridges that gap, the conceptual gap between heroism and victimization, so you feel the terror and the thrill of the rescue all smoothed over.
And the sources, they pinpoint this one incredibly powerful scene. Superman gets brutally beaten by Luthor's guys, and the source notes they're the only ethnically diverse group in the film. It was interesting. He gets stabbed, falls totally powerless from this high place near somewhere that looks a lot like Ground Zero. His miraculous recovery isn't just, he's Superman. It symbolizes this kind of illusory innocence and purity. The film isn't really trying to bring back the 50s, the Eisenhower era. It's looking for security by making those big 80s superhero blockbusters the thing everyone wants again, like finding comfort in a familiar movie past.
So why? Why this specific kind of rewriting? The sources say this is pretty typical of how pop culture handled 9/11. It tended to reduce huge events to representations that were voided of all historical meaning. It's almost like reality itself started feeling virtual. The 9/11 explosions on TV look like disaster movies we'd already seen.
Yeah, I remember that feeling.
The idea the sources put forward is that reality became the best appearance of itself. The line just blurred between real trauma and movie spectacle.
Okay, so Superman Returns gives us a really solid case study. But the sources look broader, too, at other post-9/11 superhero films. And they see this consistent pattern dealing with trauma, dealing with control. Like Spider-Man from to 2002. It sort of rebranded New York after 9/11 as this global village of logos and corporate stuff, hinting at resilience through commerce, maybe.
Right, and connecting that wider, lots of these films, Spider-Man included, they initially took out direct shots of the World Trade Center from trailers and posters. But then subtly, you'd still see glimpses of the towers in the movies themselves. It's weird. And the sources mentioned that scene in Spider-Man, the climax, where New Yorkers help them out, shouting, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us."
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It really captured that feeling of unity right after the attacks. Very powerful.
Which is kind of contrast to later films like The Dark Knight in 2008. Gotham feels much more like a real city, like Chicago. And the Joker, he's linked to this postmodern virtual money, not old factories, but abstract finance, maybe. He's pure chaos, a world without rules.
Mm-hmm. While Batman, he represents this kind of nostalgic rewind to older forms of capitalism. He's the patriarchal capitalist trying to restore order, the old ways.
It's a different vibe entirely.
And then there's how they explore trauma. The sources bring up V for Vendetta from 2006. The main character's trauma leads him to radicalization, where terrorist acts are shown as maybe legitimate protest against a bad government. Which is totally different from Batman, right? He has trauma, but he doesn't go that route. He stays within the system, more or less.
Right.
And then you had TV shows like 24. Jack Bauer became this fantasy figure. Using all this surveillance tech, it kind of legitimized the feeling of being watched constantly, panopticism, but made it seem okay, stripping away the worrying parts about privacy.
Yeah, 24 was huge. And even straight-up disaster movies like Cloverfield from 2008 directly used 9/11 visuals. Panicked crowds, dust clouds, Manhattan looking like a wasteland. The source points out, Cloverfield, the monster movie, did way better financially than the movies about 9/11 like United 93.
Which suggests maybe audiences preferred to deal with those fears indirectly, negotiate these issues therapeutically within the safety of a text, as the source puts it. It's safer with a monster.
That leads to this really provocative idea from the sources, the notion that maybe the 9/11 attacks were, in some perverse way, exactly what America had asked for.
It's a disturbing thought. But why this pull towards catastrophe? The sources quote the author Don DeLillo. He said, "Only a catastrophe gets our attention. We want them, we need them, we depend on them as long as they happen somewhere else." It points to this deep, maybe addiction to catastrophe. Maybe, as the sources suggest, it's a way to shake up the brain fade of postmodern life, that feeling of numbness.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for us? Superman Returns and these other post-9/11 superhero movies, they weren't just simple entertainment. They got tangled up in this big national conversation about identity, trauma, authority. They gave us these powerful fantasies, often very nostalgic, of order in a world that felt totally out of control.
Yeah, the main thread from our sources is that those anxieties, the ones driving the whole 9/11 discourse, they didn't just vanish when the administration changed. These feelings have deeper roots, tied up in the weirdness of postmodernism, where sometimes it feels easier to imagine the world ending than, say, a fundamental change in how our economy works. The huge popularity of these films suggests this real yearning for a reboot of history, to get back some lost sense of identity, community, often through these strong patriarchal figures and familiar power structures.
So this deep dive really shows that these heroes flying through New York or brooding over Gotham, they aren't just fighting CGI monsters or villains. They embody a whole nation's hopes, its fears, and this deep desire to make sense of a world that feels increasingly, well, hyper-real and profoundly unsettling at the same time. Okay, so here's the final thought, maybe a bit provocative to leave you with. If our collective dreams, our anxieties, are constantly being acted out for us on screen in these huge spectacles of heroism and disaster, what does that tell us about our own ability to face up to the hard kernel of the real, as some thinkers call it, actual reality outside the movie theater? What kind of new superpowers would we actually need to truly unpack and maybe even reshape our own historical story? Something to think about.